All right, so starting off with corporate social responsibility, CSR. So what is corporate social responsibility? So there's a really long definition that I've got here, and there's one that I'm going to simplify it down to right after, but I want to read the technical definition first. So CSR is the notion that corporations have an obligation to contingent groups in society other than stockholders and beyond that prescribed by law or union contract. So that is a very fancy way of saying that, and here is the more simple definition. Companies have responsibility to society more than what's written in law. So what does that mean necessarily? So if it's more than something that's in law, right, that means on a basic level that it's not something that companies have to do, right? It isn't something that is required of these companies. So we would say that that is voluntary. The companies do it out of their own will, right? And when a company does something out of its own will, usually that means that it perceives some benefit in doing this. Because what is the purpose of a company? The purpose of a company is to make money and to produce products that people appreciate or that people like. So they have to create products that improve the lives of everyone around them. And if it doesn't improve the life of everyone around them, then they don't make money in a fair trade, right? So what a company wants to do is make money. So why would they do something voluntarily if not to make money? Okay, well, that kind of brings us to the reason why a company has responsibilities to society other than what's written in law. So this is the idea, corporate social responsibility, that companies can't, even though they might be allowed to legally, companies can't dump waste into a river, for example. After they finish up with production of certain products, there's going to be waste and they dump it into the local river. Well, according to corporate social responsibility, a company should not do that. And if a company is socially responsible and responsible to the environment, then they won't do that. Well, why won't they do that? If it's legal and it's cheaper for them, and a company is out to make money and to produce so everybody else benefits off of their production, why would a company do something that is more expensive to them? Why would they be responsible when it is more expensive and less beneficial for them to be responsible, right? Well, that comes down to what society wants, and this is supply and demand again. So if you guys remember supply and demand says that where there is a demand, a supply will follow, because the more demand there is, the more people want to buy a product, the more people will want to supply that product, and that regulates the price, right? So here's a little article that I have right here, and I still haven't uploaded the notes. I plan to do that after this class is over so that you guys could see the rest of this and economic globalization before I get into sending you guys the notes. But when I post up the notes, it'll have this article here and the link to the article. Let's just dive right into what this article says, the most important part that I saw. So, consumers are looking to align themselves with brands that are ready to take a stand and lead conversations, as well as change, on ideas they care about. Around 62% of millennial shoppers find it important to interact with a brand who makes it a point to give back. Right? So, there are a lot of important parts of this few sentences right here. So what this says is that the majority of customers out there, just a quick clarifier, consumers and brands, those are two marketing terms. So as you can probably tell, we're starting to move into marketing and away from economics. So consumers and brands are marketing terms. Brand is just the name for a company, and brand in marketing means the company's image in the eyes of the customers or consumers. It's said right here. In marketing, we say consumers because it describes the people who are going to buy and use your product or service, right? They're going to use it up, and they want it. So we call them consumers, and we call our companies brands because that is the perspective that people have on what we're trying to sell. All right, so what this article says, going back to it, is that 62% of consumers, especially in today's age, millennials, find that it's important to act with a brand who makes it a point to give back. So this goes right back to corporate social responsibility. Let's say you have two brands and both of them are making race cars. And one of them just sells you the race car straight out, right? They just slap a price on it and hand it on over if you give them the right amount of money, right? That would be just a regular old sale, nothing special. No corporate social responsibility is put into that openly. And now the other brand is selling their product for the same or slightly more money, but what they say along with that is for every race car that you buy, we give a donation to the the Red Heart, or the Red Cross, or other charitable services, right? So when you see that, the company is saying that if you buy a race car, we will in turn do something good for the rest of society. And so if you look at both of them, both race cars, then you look at the one that just gives you the race car and you look at the other one that does something actively good every time a race car is bought, the majority of shoppers, 62% of those millennials, say that it's more important to interact with companies that stand on values, stand on certain purposes that they have towards making society better. So the majority of people will want to go for that company, even if it's slightly more, but if it's the same price, of course they want to go for that company that will do something good every time they buy a product from them. So this brings us back to the original idea over here. Why would companies do this voluntarily? If companies are out looking for a profit for every time they sell their product, and if corporate social responsibility is voluntary, they don't have to do it by law, why do they do it? Well, they do it because it is demanded by the shoppers. These shoppers want companies who are going to do good for society. So what people can do, what shoppers can do to change society and to change these companies is demand things, demand companies have values. So if you want to change a company, if you want to make them promote something positive, then you have to want that from society, and you have to want to be willing to pay more for a certain product to get that good value out of a company. So companies promote corporate social responsibility because they think that people like that, and people are going to buy more products from them when they see that they do something good for the rest of society or for the community or things like that. So I'm sure you guys have seen companies that say something along the lines of that example that I just gave, that they give back to the community in certain ways, or that they for every product that is bought, we donate X amount of money to a charity, or we give certain products to to homeless kids or families. And that's all corporate social responsibility here. We, the customers, we, the consumers, are making these companies do good things because we demand it and we are willing to pay more so that they do it. So this kind of brings it back to the definition that I give to our capitalist society, right? So our capitalist economic system. So capitalism, and this isn't a term that I came up with, it's kind of plagiarized, but anyway, I think it's a very good way of describing capitalism. Capitalism is, in fancy terms, it is forced altruism. So what does that mean? Well, that means I am forced to do something good for you to have you do something good for me. So if to bring this down to the basic level in capitalism, if I want to make money, then I have to make your life better in some way. Because if I don't make your life better with my product or my service, then you're not going to pay me. So the richest people in capitalism, ideally, are the people who have done the most good for society. So, for example, Jeff Bezos, he made Amazon. And because he made Amazon, he became super rich because everybody could get whatever they wanted like that, right? They could get it in a day with 1 day shipping, right? And they could get all of the products and services they want very quickly. And everybody loved that. And that made everybody's life a lot better. And because of that, Jeff Bezos became richer and richer. And the same thing with Bill Gates. Bill Gates made Microsoft, made computers, and innovated a lot in that area. And because of that, he became super rich because everybody wanted a computer and it made everybody's life a lot easier, a lot more productive, and a lot better. And because of that, they gave him their money, and in exchange, he gave them computers, and he became rich off of that. So capitalism, forced altruism. So the way that we get these companies to be more altruistic or to be more value-driven is to demand it and be willing to pay for things that are slightly more expensive, or even if they're the same price. But if there's something that the company does as what we call collateral, or on the side as a effect of an action they choose, well, then it's probably going to be a little bit more expensive. So if we're willing to pay a little bit more for the company to be value driven, then that company will be value driven because it is profitable for them. So that more or less is corporate social responsibility. And again, like I said, I'll have the link to this article if you guys are interested in that. I'll have the link in the notes when I post it up at the end of class. All right. And so the last topic for this week, the last one that we missed, is economic globalization. And we kind of went over economic globalization when we talked about supply chains. Oops. Back up above. And I told you guys that we would finish off this week with economic globalization. So here we go, going back to it. But before I get started in globalization, if anybody has any questions about corporate social responsibility, feel free to unmute yourself and ask now. But if not, then I will just keep on chugging. All right. So, economic globalization. What is it? So, here's the technical definition. Globalization is the spread of products, technology, information, and jobs across international borders and cultures. So this comes from Investopedia, which is a very good site if you guys want to learn more about business terms or any specific topics in the business category. Investopedia is a very strong resource that you guys can use. All right, so the easier definition of globalization is that Globalization is the interdependence of nations around the globe via free trade. So everybody needs each other. Everybody is connected to each other because of trade of jobs, technology, and information, all these things that they talked about in this definition right here. So because all of these aspects of business are traded across countries, everybody becomes interdependent. So, interdependent. And the reason why this is because of things like supply chains, as we talked about before. And that's probably the main reason. So why do we enact globalization, right? Why is it good for us to trade? So the reason why it's good for us to trade is because there is what is called comparative advantage in trade, right? So to explain the difference between comparative advantage and just an advantage, I would say I'll give two examples here. So apples versus oranges, right? Let's say, let's move this down and say country X and Y. We'll have over here X and Y again. All right. So let's say country X makes 50 apples and 100 oranges. Whoops, and 100 oranges. Let's say country Y makes 10 apples and 20 oranges. Well, country X here clearly has the advantage because they can produce way more apples and oranges than can country Y. Right? So they have just the total absolute advantage over country Y. And that's just because this number right here is bigger than these numbers right here. All right? So then what is comparative advantage? So we go over here and say that country X can make 10 apples and 100 oranges, and country Y can make 5 apples and 10 oranges. Well, even though country X can produce more apples than country Y and more oranges than country Y, right? The proportions are completely different, right? So country Y would have the comparative advantage in apples only. And I'll explain why. So the reason why country Y would have the comparative advantage is because it is more beneficial for country X to produce oranges than apples because they can produce more of them, right? And it is more beneficial for them to trade with country Y because country Y can specialize in these apples. Because if they, even though they can make more oranges as well, it is beneficial for country Y to trade their apples to country X and country X to trade their oranges to country Y. Because right here, the proportion is they can make 1/10 the amount of apples they can make to oranges. And country X over here can make 1/2 So it is better for them since they can produce more apples comparatively than country X can on a fractional level. This is getting a little bit confusing, I think, because it gets comparative advantage. Once you get it, it becomes a little easier, but just getting there is a little tough. So if any of you guys have questions, just ring them out. Or if you feel more comfortable talking about it in office hours, again, I am totally down to talk about it in office hours. So just bring it up with me. And also, just while I'm on the topic, if you guys want to give me feedback as well in office hours, that would be great for today. And let me know. Only a couple of people talked about this last time, but let me know if you prefer watching things on YouTube, or if you just want me to post it up that way, or if you like being able to be in class with me. So yeah, just let me know, and we can talk about that in class. All right, so going back to comparative advantage. So let's say, let's go back to the fractions right here. Unless somebody has questions. Yeah, is that you? Circling Y? You can throw it in the chat because I know you always have problems with your audio. Anyway, close that. All right. So comparative advantage again. So let's go back to Y, right? So X and Y. So the reason why Y would make more is because their fraction of apples to oranges that they can produce is a larger fraction than what country X can make, right? And country X can make more oranges fractionally than country Y can make. So it is more beneficial, even though they can produce less, for country Y to stop focusing on oranges and produce only apples, and for country X to stop producing apples and produce only oranges, and the two of them trade. So this is the idea of economic globalization here, right? That countries produce what they are best fit to produce in their comparative advantages, and then trade with other countries based on those comparative advantages. So that is the basic idea. That's the theory why it's better to have economic globalization and have countries specialize in what they're good at and sell those in trade. And then for the rest of it, they import it from other countries. And that is where we get that interdependence, right? Because I am no longer, if I'm country Y, I am no longer producing oranges. I'm only producing apples. So I am dependent on country X to get my oranges. And if they don't produce and sell my oranges to me, then I'm not going to get oranges. So, but that's the con to it. The pro to globalization is I would get those oranges for cheaper because country X can produce them in a cheaper way or in larger quantities. So I would get all of my products cheaper, but I'd be dependent on country X. So, so we can go over here and look at the pros and cons. So, oh, what's up here? So the pros and cons. Pro. So globalization has created economic growth, has led to more jobs globally, and has allowed for more product, labor, and capital, meaning money, to flow between countries. So because countries specialize in certain products or in certain markets, we have been able to produce more jobs globally because everybody has been much more productive, right? This system right here is much more productive than this system. The problem, though, what I'm saying is, even though this system is more productive than this system, this one is more risky. And the reason why is the job creation, even though there are more jobs globally, the job creation isn't equal in all countries. So some countries may actually lose jobs while others gain a lot more jobs. Because some countries just stop producing. For example, you would lose a lot of jobs in the orange industry over here. And because you can produce more oranges than you can produce apples, there are probably a lot more jobs in this orange sector. So you stopping production of oranges is going to mean more jobs lost for you. And them focusing on oranges is going to mean more jobs created for them. So this country, country Y, even though they could get oranges for cheaper and they'd start to sell more apples, they would probably start to lose a lot of jobs in producing oranges because they just stopped producing it. And so supply lines are subject to uncertainty based on foreign governments. So kind of what we were talking about before with if country X has problems with its supply lines, since all these countries are interdependent, then country Y would have problems as well. In this situation, they would have problems getting oranges. And some industries are entirely wiped out in a country due to another country's competitive advantage. So like I was saying just a couple minutes ago, the orange industry would probably be entirely wiped out by country X because it's just more productive for country X to make oranges for country Y. But that's dangerous for country Y because if there's ever any problems between the two countries and country X just decided to stop selling oranges, then there'd be no place for country Y to start producing oranges because their whole orange economy was destroyed, right? So they'd have to rebuild that all the way up. So it's very dangerous at times to be economically independent or interdependent, but at the same time, it makes all of your products cheaper, it makes production more efficient, and it also creates more jobs in certain areas in certain countries. All right, so what does it take to go global? So going global can be very beneficial for your company for many reasons, tying this back into why this is important for business. So going global in businesses can mean cheaper labor. So if you go over to country X and you're looking for labor in the orange business, since there is a lot more production of oranges and a lot more people who are willing to take jobs in the orange business, the wages are probably going to be a lot cheaper for you to hire people in that area. Or in a less positive view, some people go over to other countries because they don't have laws and regulations on how much you can pay or how many hours you can force your workers to work. So some countries have looser regulations on that, so you can go into other countries to find cheaper means of labor. There is less regulation sometimes and taxation in other countries, and there is more market demand sometimes. Depending on what your product is, there can be more market demand in other countries for your product. And another reason why you would go is there's less competition in some other countries. So for example, this past spring break, I was in Mexico for a class on economics. And one of the things that a speaker said to us, because we visited an American entrepreneur who moved to Mexico maybe 10 years ago, an American entrepreneur moved down there and started his own business in Mexico. One of the things he said is he used the term saturated market for America, meaning that America has tons of businesses which sell tons of products, and every single problem that you can think of in America, there is most likely a solution to it by some product out there. The American system or the American market has been very saturated, meaning it is very full, it is overflowing with products and businesses looking to solve all of your problems. And one of the things that he was saying in Mexico that he saw was there are a lot less businesses because of the banking system over there. I'm not going to dive too deep into Mexican economics, but one of the problems was, he said, not many people can get a loan for their businesses because of corruption with the banking system. And so the result of that is not many people are starting their own businesses because they don't have the loans to do so. So not many people are starting businesses, and there is less people looking to solve your problems because there are less businesses to produce products to solve your problems. And because of that, there's less competition. So somebody going from the US and moving to Mexico would probably do that because they can find A, cheaper labor, B, there would be less taxation or regulations down there, C, more market demand, more people want their problems to be solved, and they have more problems that have gone unsolved because there aren't as many businesses who are solving their problems. And D, there's less competition and other barriers to entry. So, what is the problem with some of these? Well, let's get started with, well, actually we can talk about all of them in one sweep. So, what is the problem with things like cheaper labor? Some of you have probably heard of the poor working conditions in some of the factories in a place like China, because they have far less regulations on worker standards than the US does. So if there are far less worker standards, then why do companies go over there? Well, for all of these factors that we talked about. And how do we bring them back? How do we bring jobs back to the United States? This has been a topic that a lot of people have been talking about. It was a topic of a lot of political campaigns. How do we bring jobs to different countries, right? How do you bring a job from France to the United States, or from any given country to another country? Well, the way that you draw businesses is by making it the most appealing that you can to them. So the reason why a lot of jobs have been moving to China, and a lot of people have been complaining about that, is because, for better or for worse, for their labors, but China has been making all of these very attractive to companies. So the reason why Apple goes over to China is because they can produce the most iPhones or the most Apple products for the cheapest, right? So all of these are cheapest in China for Apple, and they have connections in China because of that. They have built up over time more connections. So what a country has to do to attract people is look at these four factors and say, okay, how are we going to make it more attractive for businesses? Because like we were talking about with the supply and demand curves, the cheaper it is for a company, the more they'll want to go over to a country, and the more businesses that are there, the more people are hired. So this is going back to trade-offs, right? How much are you willing to sacrifice for businesses coming back to the US? Are you willing to sacrifice those minimum wage laws? Are you willing to sacrifice taxation? And factors like that. So the minimum wage laws can be, as we talked about before, a way for you to raise the the wages of employees, but can also be a way that less people are hired. So to attract a company to another country, maybe you would have to change your minimum wage laws, or maybe you would have to lower regulations and taxation on businesses. All those are things that companies are attracted to and countries have to think about in terms of keeping jobs or gaining jobs in their country. And this happens as well with states. So states also compete for jobs and trying to bring companies into their state to make it more attractive for them. And for example, Illinois has a lot of taxation and a lot of regulations. So it is not overly appealing to businesses to want to stay in Illinois. The reason why people want to stay in Illinois is because of Chicago and like the volume of the city and the benefits of being in Chicago, which are it's a very good financial hub. There are a lot of finance businesses in Chicago and a lot of stock trading in Chicago. But the problem is there is a lot of regulation in Chicago. So it goes back and forth. The more regulation you have, maybe the better it is for working conditions, or the better it is in terms of forced corporate social responsibility. But the problem with that is there is a trade-off, and that trade-off is maybe less businesses are attracted to doing business in your state. Okay, so now moving on, we'll go into week 2 over here. And well, it looks like we'll just have enough time to talk about the evolution of sales right here. So this looks like a lot. I know, a lot of writing, a lot of words. So I'll try and go through it slowly. It's not all that complicated, and we only have 15 minutes left of class. So we'll just work on this, and wherever we get to, and we'll finish up. So the evolution of sales. So this was, a lot of this, you guys have probably noticed, we're all in your pre-test. So if this looks familiar, that's probably where it's from. But this is, the evolution of sales talks about what people look for in a selling economy. So let's get started with it. So at the beginning of the United States, and around that time in the 18th century, right, we had what we call an agrarian economy. So commodities, which that's the name for products, more or less. Commodities or products are extracted from the land. So they're farmed, or they're tilled, they're picked, but they're taken from the land, and that's how we got our products. So products were interchangeable. You'd buy a basket of apples. It wouldn't really matter what basket of apples you bought. You just bought them, right? They were apples, and so you bought it. They were stored in bulk. Traders sold the products, so the people who would sell them would go to stuff like farmers markets, or there would just be trades between certain farmers, or things like that. It was a lot less formal. And buyers found markets, or were found in a market. They were the people who would go around to the stands in a farmer's market and would buy the products right there, or they would go up to the farmers individually and talk to them about buying. And the demand, the most important part here, the demand was driven by product characteristics, right? So it was driven by, and this is all, remember, aspects of the agrarian society, or the agrarian economy, and all of these factors changed over time. But the product characteristics, so Like let's say the demand was driven by like let's say Granny Smith apples versus Macintosh apples. I don't know if you guys have heard of both of those types of apples. Granny Smith, in my opinion, are just nasty. But anyway, so you would the demand would be how many, or would be driven by how many Granny Smith apples were produced that year versus how many Macintosh apples were produced that year. And that is what drove the supply, pretty much drove the demand in that aspect right there. And so onto the industrial economy. So eventually, due to external factors at that time, we're not really going to get into the reasons why things changed, but eventually the US grew into an industrial economy. And you guys have probably heard in your history lessons about the Industrial Revolution. Well, that is what led up to the industrial economy. So instead of commodities, and instead of them being extracted from the ground, products were then called goods. And goods were produced in factories, right? And the quality of the product was much more important than in years before. And one of the main factors of the industrial era was that products had become standardized, right? So you would pump out a car on a production line, a assembly line, and all of the cars would be exactly the same, right? You'd have one guy just doing nothing but putting on the tires on the cars all day long. Another guy would be putting on the doors all day long. Some other guys, windshields all day long. That's all they did. And so the product of that, what happened was that all of the cars were exactly the same because they all went through the same exact process. Products were placed in an inventory after production. So instead of them being sold right away at a market, what happened was the products were put into storage, and people would come and buy them, and as people bought them, the products that were in storage were moved into the selling area. So they were all held in storage, though. They were in inventory after they were produced. Products were sold by the person or by a manufacturer, and the product. So like Ford would create their own cars, and then Ford would turn around and sell their cars, right? So there was no like middleman trader who brought your products to the market. There was just the Ford people made it, and then they turned around and they sold it. And products were bought by what was called a user, and the product features was what drove the demand. So you would look at two cars that came off an assembly line, one from Honda and one from Ford, and what would change your mind on making you buy a Ford over a Honda was you said, Ford has some pretty nice features. Maybe they've got a better sound system, or they've got heated seats, which they didn't have at the time, but anyway. It was the features. Like maybe they had a radio, which at the time was crazy. They had a radio in the car. Oh my gosh. And that would be the super cool feature that you liked. So features was what drove people's demand, what helped people make a decision. All right. Until recently, we were in the service economy. Experiential economy is the economy that we're in right now, but and it's a pretty radical change, and it happened only, I think, in like the past maybe 10 years, 10, 15 years. Anyway, so the service economy was the standard until more recently, and the experience economy is pretty new. But so the service economy focused on services, not goods, right? People didn't want to buy goods anymore. They wanted to buy services more. That was the main aspect of the service economy. So what made it different from all the other types of economies? And I've got the examples down here for when I post up the notes. The difference here would be that it was the delivery that was important. So the way that you got your product, or the way that it was, like the aesthetics of it, right? Which was not a physical attribute, which was interesting because in all other years it was something physical that was important to the people there. But this was what is called an intangible attribute. It wasn't something physical that you could necessarily, touch or point to. Products were customized to different types of individuals, right? So in marketing, it's broken down and called segmentation. So a segmentation would be, let's say, this box right here, this is the market. And what we're going to do is, because we know that people with different colored shirts like to buy different products, what we're going to do is we're going to take people who all wear red shirts, and we're going to put all red shirt people in this category right here. Take people who all wear green shirts in this category right here. And on and on and on, right, with all the other categories. And the reason why we did this was because then we would send all of our marketing stuff to make it specialized to these segments, these market segments. Whoops. So that all of the people who wore red shirts would get the same marketing advertisements or emails sent to them, and all the people who wore green shirts specialized to them. And the reason why we did that was because if we specialized it to the people who all wear red shirts, they're more likely, because we know what makes them want to buy things as a group. We know they're more likely to buy our product if we target our marketing towards them, right? And the same thing with people with green shirts. Obviously, red shirt, green shirt wouldn't necessarily be what you're targeting. It'd be more like parts of your, like where you live, what part of the country, meaning you're in, or if you're a guy or a girl, or how old you are. These are what's called demographics. And that kind of is a way to break things down into groups of people by age, by race, by geographic location, stuff like that. And demographics helped us change our way of selling into a more specialized, segmented market. So that's what we mean by customized. Things were broken down into certain boxes, and people were put in certain boxes for purposes of marketing. And then products were delivered on demand. So you know how we talked about things were put in inventory after they're produced? Well, here in the service economy, products were delivered when people demanded them, which made it easier on the companies because they didn't have to produce a bunch of products and then just hold them in storage and hope that somebody buys it. What you would do is when somebody demanded it, you would provide it. The seller was known as the product provider. The buyer was known as the client. And the benefits of the product was what drove demand. So what people were interested in is how this product helps them, right? They weren't interested in the specific features of the product. They weren't interested in the product characteristics. They're interested in how this specific product helps them. So I think this is a good time to go to the examples that I wrote down to remind myself. So an example of a way to picture all of this is to think of coffee, which I'm sure plenty of you like, but coffee. So the agrarian economy would be a a good way to describe it would be coffee beans. So in an agrarian economy, what would be sold is you just plant the coffee trees, I think they are. I don't know. Coffee trees, and then you would collect all of the coffee beans, and you would sell the coffee beans. You'd take it out of the fruit that coffee beans are actually in. They're surrounded by this little fruit. You'd take it out of the fruit. You'd roast the beans, or no, you just take the beans and you would just sell them, right? You'd get a huge bag of the beans and you'd sell them. In the industrial economy, you'd have packaged coffee. So now we've taken the coffee out of the fruit, we've roasted them, and we've put it in a bag, and then we are selling them, right? That's the industrial economy. We've got all these bags and bags of coffee, and we're selling them. And that's just the industrial economy. And you can see all of these aspects still going on today. It's just these are older styles of selling, and that's not the current trend, right? That's not what people get excited about. That's not what people are really looking to. So even though you can still see like packaged coffee around, people don't get excited by packaged coffee. So you would just buy your coffee in a bag. The service economy, you would go to a coffee shop and your coffee would actually be brewed for you, right? You'd go up and you'd ask it, and on demand, like we were talking about before, delivered on demand, you would order a coffee and they'd brew it up for you. And then boom, the final product that you would get is brewed coffee. All right. And now moving on to the experiential economy, experience economy, we would have Starbucks. So what's the difference between these two, you might be asking? Because brewed coffee, that's what they do at Starbucks, right? Well, that's not the only purpose of Starbucks. The reason that people go to Starbucks may be to buy a coffee, but the reason that people sit down and stay at Starbucks is because the experience of the atmosphere of Starbucks. What Starbucks provides isn't just the coffee, it's the environment that you're in when you drink the coffee. The experience that you have while you're at Starbucks. When you're sipping coffee with the music playing in the background and the rustic design of the coffee shop. You sit down in huge leather couches and they've got low lighting, and you sip on your coffee and you read the news or something like that. And it's a full experience. So to go into it, what excites people today are experiences. So products are staged, like in a clothing store, products are staged to get to get a good presentation of the product. And it's the most important thing, how you present your product. Not exactly, as before, what the most important thing was, like the quality or the products being interchangeable. What was most important, or what is most important today, is how the products are presented. So a lot of this is actually being laughed about today in the marketing world, because you could take a $5 shirt, but if you put it behind like a rustic wooden wall with spotlights all over it, and put it alone in a room, and people go in to a store, what they're going to see is they're going to look at that $5 shirt that they could go to Goodwill and find it stacked in a rack. They're going to look at that $5 shirt and they're going to think, wow, that is a good looking shirt. And they're going to say, wow, that shirt looks really nice. It's probably like very high quality. And the reason why they're going to think all of this is because the way it's presented is a lot better than the way it's presented at Goodwill. At Goodwill, they look at it and it's stuffed in a rack, and all of the clothes are just put on just a regular rack, and it's not presented in any good way. So people are going to think that it's better quality, it's a more unique product, they're going to like it more because of that. And it's all because of the product presentation. You can change somebody's mind based on the presentation. So the offering of the product is intended to be memorable. So when you go into a Starbucks or when you go into a coffee shop, what they want to do in this example of Starbucks, what they want to do is make it memorable for you. Make the experience that you have something that you want to keep on repeating, because it's not just the coffee that you're buying and the coffee that you're enjoying, but the experience that you have in the coffee shop when you drink your coffee. So they're not selling you coffee at Starbucks. What they sell you at Starbucks is an experience, right? That's what's happening in today's world. We're not selling products, we're selling experiences. And the experience is revealed over a duration. The seller is the stager, the buyer is the guest, and the sensation, the experience, is what drives the demand. So the cooler the experience, the cooler the sensation, the more people demand it. And that's why some of these coffee shops that you see are just really, if you're, let's say you're 80 years old and you've seen a couple of these economies come and go, if you go to one of these hip coffee shops, one of these hipster coffee shops, they've got like, a bike tire on the side of their coffee shop, and like their coffee shop is a garage, like what people today, the middle or upper class people would look at and go, wow, that's so edgy, or that's so hipster. Older people would say, huh, like that's stupid. It's they have a rusty bike tire on the side of their room. What people today would see is it's very rustic, it's a different experience, and it looks very hipster. And so people would want to buy from a place that's more hipster rather than like a Dunkin' Donuts that doesn't really try and sell you any experience, right? So if that's at all confusing, remember, feel free to ask about it in office hours. We have come to the end of class today, so thanks for tuning in, guys, and I'll see you at office hours today. And if any of you have any questions that you want to ask me now, while I still have all of this pulled up, you can unmute yourself and go right ahead. Or if you just want to talk about this for a little bit more, feel free to stay on and ask questions, but you guys are free to go, and I'll see you at office hours.
Thank you, bye.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Hey, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, no problem.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi. I kind of had one question.
Yeah, for sure. Is it on this stuff, or is it on the stuff we talked about at the beginning of class?
It's between the brewed coffee and Starbucks,
Okay.
and maybe a little bit of the demographic market, kind of.
Yeah, for sure.
So with the demographic market, you're trying to target a group of people more than just an individual person?
Yeah. So, demographics and segmentation. Segmentation is the idea that we're breaking up groups of people and we're putting them into boxes, right? So that it's easier to target them. So we don't really do segmentation as much in marketing anymore today. Today we make it more personalized. So we call it personalization. But when we talk about segmentation, that's saying like, if we are a company that sells products all over the United States, we are not going to sell the product the same way to a person who lives in Chicago as we are to a person who lives in, like Nebraska, right? Because those are two completely different experiences. Chicago is a city with a lot of people in it, and it's very active, fast-paced, and all of that. So the advertising that we're going to do for Chicago is very different than the advertising that we're going to do for Nebraska, where things are a lot more spread out. It's a lot more rural. There's a lot more farms. It's very slow. So we're going to
a lot of economical footprint.
Yeah. So what's going to happen is we're going to we're going to advertise differently for these two people. Like, and that's the idea of segmentation. So that's geography. And I'm not going to advertise in another way. So if we're talking about different demographics, I'm not going to advertise the same way to a 12-year-old that I'm going to an 80-year-old, right? Or even, to a 5-year-old. To a 5-year-old, we're going to start advertising like as if we were talking about Sesame Street, Whereas an 80-year-old, we have to be more, we have to give more examples, be more sophisticated, and have
quite know what you're doing.
yeah. So demographics are pretty much just the idea that like we need to break people down into different groups and segmentation. We need to segment them different ways because people who are younger we can put in one box and people who are older we can put in another box because they're not gonna buy our products if we give them both the same ad, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna like different things and they're going to be convinced by different things. So we're not gonna try and talk to them the same way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.